When I married Daniel Harper, I believed I understood the man I was building my life with. For 7 years, our marriage had been something people admired from the outside. We lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood just outside Seattle, in a house with a white fence and tall maple trees that turned deep crimson every autumn. It was the kind of neighborhood where people waved at each other while collecting their mail, and children rode their bikes down the sidewalks after school. From the outside, our life looked perfect. Inside, it was complicated. I worked as a freelance graphic designer, which meant I spent most of my days at home in my upstairs office. The room overlooked the backyard where Daniel had once promised we would build a small garden together. That promise had been made 4 years ago. The space was still empty except for patchy grass and a lonely wooden bench that had faded under years of rain. Daniel, on the other hand, worked downtown as a financial consultant. His job demanded long hours, constant meetings, and frequent business dinners. At least, that's what he always said. For years, I believed him. I trusted him the way you trust the ground beneath your feet, without questioning whether it might suddenly disappear. But looking back now, I realized the cracks had been there long, before everything fell apart. It started with small things, subtle things, the kind of things you dismiss at first because the alternative, the truth, feels too painful to even consider. One evening in late October, I noticed Daniel had started taking his phone everywhere with him, not just casually, obsessively. Bathroom, kitchen, garage, even when he went outside to take out the trash. At first, I laughed it off, expecting a promotion call. I teased as he slipped the phone into his pocket while walking past me. He smiled quickly, but something about the expression felt rehearsed. "You know how my boss is," he said, always calling at random times. I nodded and returned to my laptop, but something inside me shifted, just slightly, like the first faint tremor before an earthquake. Over the next few weeks, Daniel grew increasingly distant. He came home later than usual, sometimes past midnight. His excuses were always logical. Meetings, networking events, last-minute client emergencies. But the man who once told me every detail of his day had suddenly become guarded, careful, and quiet. One night, while we were eating dinner at the kitchen island, I asked casually, "How's the Henderson account going?" He paused, just for a second, but it was long enough for me to notice. "What Henderson account?" he asked. I blinked. "You mentioned it last week." I said, "The big client your team was trying to land." Daniel cleared his throat and took a sip of water. "Oh, right, that one." But he didn't say anything else, and that silence lingered between us like an invisible wall. I told myself I was imagining things. Marriage changes over time. People grow busy. Life gets complicated. Still, the uneasiness remained. Then came the first real sign. It happened on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I had just finished a design project and decided to surprise Daniel by bringing him lunch downtown. It wasn't something I usually did, but the idea felt spontaneous and romantic. Maybe we needed that. Maybe we both did. I picked up his favorite Thai takeout and drove to his office building, humming along to the radio while windshield wipers fought against a steady drizzle. But when I reached the reception desk, the receptionist looked confused when I mentioned Daniel's name. "Daniel Harper?" she repeated. "Yes," I said. "Financial consultant. He works on the 11th floor." She frowned and typed something into her computer. "I'm sorry," she said slowly, "but Daniel left the office 2 hours ago." The words hit me like cold water. "Left?" I asked. "Yes," he said. He had a meeting off-site. A meeting? I forced a smile and thanked her before walking back to my car. The rain had gotten heavier. Drops slammed against the windshield while I sat there gripping the steering wheel. Something felt wrong, deeply wrong, but I couldn't prove it. Not yet. Over the next few weeks, the distance between us grew wider. Daniel stopped asking about my work, stopped noticing when I cut my hair, stopped touching my hand when we watched movies together. Sometimes he would sit on the couch scrolling through his phone, smiling at something on the screen. And when I asked what was so funny, he'd quickly lock the device. "Just work stuff," he'd say. "Work stuff." The words started to sound like lies. Then one night, everything changed. It was nearly midnight when Daniel finally came home. I had been pretending to sleep on the couch while waiting for him. The TV flickered silently in the dark living room. He didn't notice me at first. He walked in quietly, took off his jacket, and placed his phone on the coffee table. Then he went upstairs to shower. The moment the bathroom door closed, I felt my heart begin to pound. I had never gone through his phone before, not once in 7 years. But something inside me, some instinct I couldn't ignore anymore, pushed me forward. My hands trembled as I picked up the device. The screen lit up instantly, and there it was, a message notification from a contact saved simply as L. I hesitated. Then I opened it. The message read, "I can't stop thinking about last night. I wish you were here instead of with her." The world seemed to tilt beneath me. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My fingers scrolled upward through the conversation. Photos, flirtatious messages, inside jokes, and finally, a picture. Daniel and a woman I had never seen before. They were sitting at a restaurant table, leaning close together, smiling in a way that felt far too intimate to be innocent. The timestamp showed the photo had been taken 3 nights ago. The same night, Daniel told me he had been working late. My chest tightened as realization crashed over me. My husband wasn't just lying. He was cheating. And judging by the messages, it had been going on for months. Footsteps echoed from upstairs. Panic surged through me. I quickly placed the phone back on the table and returned to the couch just as Daniel came down the stairs. He glanced at me, surprised. "You're still awake?" I forced a sleepy smile. Couldn't fall asleep. He nodded and kissed my forehead briefly before heading to the kitchen for water. But as he stood there with his back turned, I watched him in silence. The man I had trusted with my entire life. The man who promised to love me forever. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. Daniel thought he had gotten away with it. He believed I would never find out. But now that I knew the truth, everything was about to change. And Daniel Harper had no idea what was coming. That night, after discovering the messages on Daniel's phone, I didn't sleep at all. The house was quiet, but my mind refused to slow down. Every second felt heavier than the last. The rain that had started earlier in the evening continued through the night, tapping softly against the bedroom window, like a constant reminder that something in my life had changed forever. Daniel lay beside me, breathing steadily in his sleep. I stared at the ceiling. 7 years of marriage suddenly replayed in my mind like a film I had seen too many times but never fully understood. Every memory now carried a different meaning. Every moment felt suspicious. Had it started recently, or had I been blind for years? The worst part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was a realization that the man sleeping next to me had been living a completely different life, while pretending everything between us was normal. Around 3 a.m, I quietly slipped out of bed. The wooden floor creaked softly beneath my feet as I walked downstairs to the kitchen. The faint yellow light above the stove illuminated the empty room, casting long shadows across the cabinets. I poured myself a glass of water, but barely touched it. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at nothing while the pieces slowly began to connect in my mind. The late nights, the hidden phone, the mysterious work meetings. All of it finally made sense. Daniel wasn't just having an affair. He had been carefully hiding it, which meant this wasn't a mistake. It was a choice, a deliberate one. For a moment, anger surged in me so strongly that my hands trembled. I wanted to storm upstairs. I wanted to wake him up and scream the truth in his face. But something stopped me. If Daniel believed I didn't know, then I had an advantage, and I wasn't ready to lose that. Instead of confronting him, I decided to do something else. I would find out everything. Every lie, every secret, every detail he thought he had hidden. The next morning, Daniel acted exactly the way he always did. Calm, casual, unbothered. He kissed my cheek while pouring coffee and asked if I had any plans for the day. I watched him carefully while pretending everything was normal. "Just work," I said, forcing a small smile. He nodded and checked his phone quickly before slipping it into his pocket. That phone, the same phone that had shattered my entire reality the night before. Before leaving for work, Daniel grabbed his jacket and turned toward me. "I might be late tonight," he said. "Client dinner." The words felt almost insulting now, but I simply nodded. Okay. He smiled, clearly satisfied that nothing seemed unusual, then walked out the door. The moment his car disappeared down the street, I grabbed my laptop. If Daniel thought I was going to sit at home and pretend nothing was happening, he had underestimated me. The first thing I did was search the number saved under the name L. It took nearly 20 minutes of digging through social media and reverse lookup websites before I finally found something. A name, Lena Carter. My stomach tightened as I clicked on her profile. Her Instagram page was public, and the moment her photos loaded, I felt a strange mix of anger and disbelief. She looked younger than me, maybe 26 or 27. Long blonde hair, perfect makeup, the kind of confident smile that suggested she knew exactly how attractive she was. Scrolling through her profile, I noticed something else. She lived in Seattle, not far from Daniel's office. But what caught my attention the most were the photos from restaurants and bars around the city. Many of them looked strangely familiar, places Daniel had told me he went to for work dinners. My heart pounded harder as I kept scrolling. Then I saw it, a photo posted 3 days ago. The same restaurant I had seen in the picture on Daniel's phone. In the photo, Lena sat across the table from someone whose face wasn't visible, but I recognized the watch on the man's wrist instantly. It was a silver watch I had bought Daniel for our anniversary 2 years ago. My throat felt tight. There was no doubt anymore. This wasn't speculation. This was proof. But the more I looked at Lena's profile, the more something strange began to bother me. Most of her photos were taken during the day. Coffee shops, gyms, brunch restaurants. Yet in the captions, she frequently mentioned her job. Long day at the office. Late meeting again. Work never stops. Curious, I searched for her workplace. According to her LinkedIn profile, Lena Carter worked as a marketing coordinator for a small advertising firm. And when I saw the company name, my heart skipped because the office address listed was in the same building as Daniel's company. Different floor, same building, which meant something I hadn't expected. Daniel hadn't met her randomly. They had probably been seeing each other almost every day. That realization made the betrayal feel even deeper. It wasn't just secret dinners. It wasn't just late nights. Their lives had been intertwined for months, while I remained completely unaware. I leaned back in my chair, trying to calm the storm of emotions inside me. But then another thought appeared. If Lena worked in the same building as Daniel, there was a chance someone else knew. Someone who had seen them together. Someone who could confirm what was really happening. An idea began forming in my mind. Later that afternoon, I changed into a simple black coat and drove downtown. The city was busy as usual. Cars lined the streets, and people hurried along the sidewalks with coffee cups in their hands. Everything felt normal. Too normal. As if the world had no idea my entire life had just collapsed. I parked a block away from Daniel's office building and sat in the car for a moment, watching the entrance. Employees came and went through the glass doors. And then I saw her, Lena Carter. She walked out of the building wearing a beige coat and carrying a laptop bag over her shoulder. Even from a distance, I recognized her immediately. She looked exactly like the photos. Confident, relaxed, completely unaware that the wife of the man she was sleeping with was sitting less than 50 feet away. For a moment, I considered walking up to her right then, confronting her, demanding answers. But I stopped myself. No, not yet. This situation required patience. Instead, I watched quietly as Lena walked down the street and entered a small cafe on the corner. Without thinking too much about it, I stepped out of my car and followed. The cafe smelled strongly of roasted coffee beans and fresh pastries. Soft jazz music played in the background while customers chatted quietly at their tables. Lena sat near the window, scrolling through her phone. I ordered a coffee and chose a table across the room, close enough to observe, far enough not to be noticed. And that's when something unexpected happened. About 10 minutes later, the cafe door opened, and Daniel walked in. My heart nearly stopped. He looked around briefly before his eyes landed on Lena. The smile that spread across his face in that moment was one I hadn't seen in months. He walked straight toward her, and without hesitation, he kissed her. Not a quick greeting, not something innocent. A slow, comfortable kiss between two people who had done this many times before. Something inside me broke, but at the same time, something else hardened. Because, in that moment, I realized something important. Daniel wasn't just lying. He was living a completely separate relationship. And if he thought I would remain the naive wife sitting quietly at home while he built a second life behind my back, he was about to learn how wrong he was. I watched them talk and laugh for nearly 40 minutes. They looked relaxed, happy, completely unaware that the person whose life they were destroying was sitting in the same room. But before leaving, I did one thing. I quietly took out my phone, and I recorded everything. Because if Daniel thought I had discovered the worst part of his betrayal, he had no idea that the real storm hadn't even begun yet. And soon, both of them would realize exactly what happens when you underestimate the wrong woman. For the rest of that afternoon, I sat in my car across the street from the cafe, staring at the door Daniel and Lena had walked out of together. My phone was still in my hand, the video I had recorded playing silently on the screen again and again. Each time I watched it, the same sharp wave of disbelief washed over me. There they were, Daniel leaning down to kiss her, like it was the most natural thing in the world, like he hadn't left a wife at home who trusted him completely. The sight felt surreal, like something from someone else's life. Yet the silver watch on his wrist and the familiar way he tilted his head when he laughed reminded me that it was very real. The man I had loved for 7 years had just revealed a version of himself I had never truly known. The sky above Seattle had turned a dull gray as the afternoon stretched into evening. The air smelled faintly of rain and car exhaust, and people moved along the sidewalks as if nothing extraordinary had happened. I envied them for a moment. They were living ordinary days, unaware that someone's marriage had quietly shattered just a few feet away. Eventually, I started the car and drove home, my thoughts swirling into something colder and more focused. The shock was fading. In its place came determination. If Daniel thought he could live 2 lives without consequences, he had underestimated the woman he married. I wasn't going to scream or throw things or beg for explanations. That kind of reaction would only give him control of the story. Instead, I wanted the truth, every hidden corner of it. That evening, Daniel returned home around 9. He walked to the front door looking tired but calm, exactly the way he always did after a long day at work. I was sitting on the couch with my laptop open, pretending to review a design project. My heart beat faster when I heard his footsteps behind me, but I kept my expression neutral. "Hey," he said casually as he set his keys on the table. "Hey," I replied, glancing up briefly. He loosened his tie and walked into the kitchen. I listened to the sound of cabinets opening and the clink of a glass as he poured water. For a moment, I imagined confronting him right then. I imagined sliding my phone across the table and showing him the video from the cafe. But I resisted the urge. Not yet. I still didn't know how deep this went. "How was your day?" he asked from the kitchen. "Busy," I said. "A client wants 3 revisions before tomorrow morning." He nodded sympathetically and leaned against the counter, sipping his drink. From the corner of my eye, I studied his face. It looked completely relaxed. Not the face of a man carrying secrets. Or maybe he had simply gotten very good at hiding them. We talked for a few minutes about meaningless things, groceries, the weather, a neighbor's dog that kept barking at night. The conversation felt painfully ordinary considering what I had witnessed just hours earlier. Eventually, Daniel went upstairs to shower while I remained on the couch, staring at the blank document on my laptop screen. The moment the bathroom door closed upstairs, I opened a new tab and returned to Lena Carter's social media pages. If I was going to uncover the truth, I needed to understand who she was. At first glance, her online life looked glamorous. Photos from trendy coffee shops, rooftop bars, fitness studios with large glass windows and sunlight pouring in. She seemed to have a wide circle of friends. Smiling group selfies, birthday celebrations, weekend hikes in the mountains. But something about it felt curated, too perfect. As I scrolled further back, small details began to emerge. Many of her photos were taken in expensive locations, restaurants and hotels that didn't match the salary of a typical marketing coordinator. There were also frequent weekend trips: Vancouver, Portland, San Francisco. How could she afford all of that? Another thing stood out. In nearly every photo where she held a drink or her hand rested on a table, I noticed the same thin gold bracelet around her wrist. It looked familiar somehow, though I couldn't immediately place why. I leaned close to the screen, zooming in on one picture. Then it hit me. 2 years ago, Daniel had bought an identical bracelet during a business trip to Italy. He had shown it to me proudly when he returned, explaining that the jeweler said it was handcrafted in Florence. At the time, I thought he intended it as a gift for me, but he had never given it to me. He said later that he lost it during the flight home. Now I realized that it had been a lie. A slow chill spread to my chest. That bracelet meant something else entirely. Their relationship hadn't started recently. It had been going on much longer than I thought. The discovery pushed me to dig even deeper. I opened LinkedIn again and studied Lena's work history carefully. According to her profile, she had joined the advertising firm 18 months ago. But before that, she had worked at another company, one that specialized in financial consulting services. My breath caught when I recognized the name. It was the same consulting firm Daniel had worked for before moving to his current company 3 years ago. Suddenly, the timeline became clearer. Daniel had met Lena at his current office building. They had known each other before, much earlier, possibly years. The realization changed everything. This wasn't a spontaneous affair born from workplace proximity. Their history ran deeper than I had imagined. As the clock on the wall ticked closer to midnight, a plan slowly formed in my mind. If I wanted the truth, I needed someone who had known Lena during that earlier time. The next morning I woke before Daniel and quietly slipped out of bed. The sky outside was still dark, and the house carried the peaceful silence of early morning. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, searching for Lena's previous company online. After a few minutes, I found what I was looking for: a former co-worker whose name appeared frequently in old tag photos with Lena. Her profile indicated she still lived in Seattle. Without giving myself too much time to overthink it, I sent her a message. I kept it simple. I introduced myself and explained that I was researching a professional collaboration involving Lena Carter. I asked if she might be willing to answer a few quick questions about Lena's work history. The message felt deceptive, but necessary. I spent the rest of the morning anxiously refreshing my inbox. To my surprise, the woman replied only an hour later. Her name was Rachel. She said she would be happy to talk, and even suggested meeting for coffee later that afternoon. By the time I arrived at the cafe where we agreed to meet, my nerves were buzzing with anticipation. Rachel turned out to be friendly and talkative, with dark curly hair and a bright smile. We exchanged small talk for a few minutes before I cautiously steered the conversation toward Lena. Rachel's expression changed immediately. "Lena Carter?" she said, raising an eyebrow. "Wow, I haven't heard that name in a while. You worked with her, right?" I asked. Rachel nodded slowly. "Yeah, for about a year." Something in her tone made me lean forward. "What was she like?" Rachel hesitated, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. "Honestly," she said, "complicated." My pulse quickened. "In what way?" Rachel glanced around the cafe before lowering her voice slightly. "Let's just say Lena had a reputation." The words hung in the air between us. "A reputation?" I repeated. Rachel nodded again. "She dated a lot of married men." The sentence hit me like a physical blow, even though I had expected something like it. "Are you sure?" I asked quietly. "Oh, yeah," Rachel said with certainty. "It caused several scandals at the company. One guy almost got divorced because of her." My hands tightened around the coffee cup. "Do you remember his name?" I asked. Rachel thought for a moment. Then she said something that made my heart stop completely. "Daniel Harper." For a second, the entire world seemed to go silent. Rachel continued speaking, unaware of the storm inside my chest. "Yeah, that was the biggest mess. He was one of the senior consultants back then. They had this whole secret relationship going on. Everyone suspected it, but no one could prove anything." My throat felt dry as sand. "And what happened?" I asked carefully. Rachel shrugged. Daniel left the company not long after the rumors started getting serious. Management didn't want a scandal, so they quietly moved him to another firm. The pieces of the puzzle finally snapped together. Daniel hadn't simply changed jobs 3 years ago for a better opportunity. He had been forced to leave because of Lena, and now, years later, their relationship had started again. I thanked Rachel for the information and walked out of the cafe feeling as though the ground beneath my feet had shifted permanently. Daniel's betrayal wasn't a recent mistake. It was a pattern, a secret relationship that had existed long before our marriage began. And suddenly a terrifying question entered my mind. If Daniel had been involved with Lena even before we married, then how much of our relationship had been real? And how much of it had been a carefully constructed lie? As I drove home through quiet streets, one thought repeated itself in my mind like a warning. Daniel thought I had only just discovered his affair. But what I had uncovered was something far worse. This wasn't just cheating. This was a deception that had been woven into our marriage from the very beginning. And now that I knew the truth, I wasn't just planning to confront him. I was planning to expose everything. For the first time since discovering Daniel's affair, I didn't feel shocked or confused anymore. What Rachel had told me at the cafe had changed everything. The betrayal was no longer just about a husband sneaking around behind his wife's back. It was bigger than that. Daniel and Lena hadn't simply stumbled into each other's lives again by accident. Their relationship had existed long before my marriage even began. The thought echoed in my mind as I drove home through the gray Seattle afternoon, rain streaking across the windshield in uneven lines. Every memory I had with Daniel suddenly felt fragile, as if it had been built on a foundation of carefully hidden lies. When I walked into the house, the silence felt different. The same furniture sat in the same places. The same faint smell of coffee lingered in the kitchen from earlier that morning. But now everything carried a sense of distance, like I was standing inside someone else's life instead of my own. I sat down at the dining table and opened my laptop again, spreading out everything I had gathered so far. Screenshots of Lena's social media posts, the video I recorded at the cafe, notes from my conversation with Rachel. Each piece felt like another layer of a puzzle that had taken years to hide. But something still bothered me. If Daniel and Lena had known each other before our marriage, then why had Daniel chosen to marry me? Was I just a convenient cover? A stable life he could show the world while continuing his secret relationship behind closed doors? The idea made my stomach twist. Over the next 2 days, I continued quietly observing Daniel while pretending everything was normal. I watched the way he checked his phone whenever it vibrated, the way he stepped into another room to answer certain calls, the way his eyes flickered with brief irritation whenever I asked simple questions about his day. The more attention I paid, the clearer the pattern became. Daniel had grown comfortable with his deception. He no longer worried about being caught. That confidence was exactly what I needed. Late Thursday evening, Daniel came home later than usual. The house had already grown dark, and the streetlights outside cast long yellow reflections across the living room floor. I was sitting at the kitchen counter scrolling through my phone when he walked in, loosening his tie and sighing dramatically. "Long day," he said. I forced a sympathetic smile. "Another client dinner?" "Yeah," he replied quickly. "Downtown." I nodded slowly, watching his face. He avoided eye contact while grabbing a bottle of water from the refrigerator. For a moment, the only sound in the room was a quiet hum of the fridge motor. Then his phone buzzed. Daniel glanced down instantly. I saw the name flash across the screen before he turned it slightly away. "Lena." He cleared his throat and slipped the phone into his pocket. "I'm going to take a quick shower," he said. "Sure," I replied calmly. The moment he disappeared upstairs, I opened the laptop waiting beside me. Over the last 2 days, I had started digging into something else, Daniel's finances. At first it felt invasive, but the more I looked, the more disturbing things became. Daniel handled most of our financial accounts, but because we filed taxes together, I still had access to several statements. And hidden among the usual bills and payments were transactions that didn't make sense. Large restaurant bills on nights he claimed to be working late, hotel charges in nearby cities, expensive jewelry purchases I had never received. Each discovery made my chest tighten further. But one payment in particular stood out. 3 months ago, Daniel had transferred a large amount of money to a private bank account that wasn't connected to our shared finances. The account holder's name? Lena Carter. I stared at the screen in disbelief. This wasn't just an affair. Daniel had been financially supporting her. My hands trembled slightly as I leaned back in the chair. The scale of his deception was bigger than I had imagined. Not only had he betrayed me emotionally, but he had also been secretly spending money that belonged to both of us. The realization ignited something fierce inside me. For years, I had trusted Daniel completely. I had supported his career, adjusted my own freelance schedule around his long work hours, and believed every explanation he gave without hesitation. Now I realized he had been using that trust as protection, but that protection was about to disappear. The following afternoon, I made another trip downtown. This time my destination wasn't Daniel's office building. It was a law firm. The receptionist greeted me politely before guiding me to a quiet conference room overlooking the city streets. Outside the tall glass windows, traffic moved slowly through the rainy afternoon, while pedestrians hurried beneath umbrellas. A few minutes later, the lawyer entered. Her name was Amanda Brooks, a calm woman in her early 40s with sharp eyes that seemed to notice everything at once. After we exchanged introductions, she listened patiently while I explained the situation. I didn't hold anything back. I told her about the messages, the cafe meeting, Rachel's story about Daniel and Lena's past, and the suspicious financial transactions I'd uncovered. Amanda remained silent for a long moment after I finished. Then she folded her hands on the table. "You've done a lot of careful observation," she said thoughtfully. "But if you're considering legal action, we need stronger documentation." "What kind?" I asked. "Proof of financial misconduct," she replied. "Proof of the relationship continuing during the marriage. And ideally, evidence showing how long the affair has been happening." I nodded slowly. "I can get that." Amanda studied my expression carefully. "Are you sure you want to go down this path?" she asked. "Once everything becomes public, there's no turning back." For a moment, I thought about the life Daniel and I had built together. The house, the memories, the future we once talked about. Then I remembered the way he had kissed Lena in that cafe like I didn't exist. "I'm sure," I said quietly. Over the next week, I continued collecting evidence. I photographed receipts, recorded suspicious conversations, tracked the pattern of Daniel's late-night meetings. Each new piece strengthened the case forming against him. But the most revealing moment happened unexpectedly. One Friday evening, Daniel believed I had gone out to meet a friend for dinner. Instead, I parked my car 2 blocks away from his office building and waited. The sky had already turned dark when Daniel finally emerged from the entrance. But he wasn't alone. Lena walked beside him. They laughed together as they crossed the street toward a small restaurant nearby, completely unaware that I was watching from inside my car. I grabbed my phone and began recording again. But this time something different happened. Instead of entering the restaurant, Daniel stopped suddenly on the sidewalk. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small black box. My breath caught. Even from across the street, I could recognize what it was. A jewelry box. Lena gasped softly as Daniel opened it. The streetlight reflected off the diamond ring inside. Time seemed to freeze. Then Daniel said something I couldn't hear clearly over the traffic noise. But Lena's reaction said everything. She covered her mouth in shock. Then she nodded, and Daniel slipped the ring onto her finger. My chest tightened as reality settled over me. My husband had just proposed to his mistress. The final piece of the truth clicked into place. Daniel wasn't just cheating. He was planning to replace me. And suddenly my plan changed, because now this wasn't just about exposing an affair. It was about making sure that when Daniel's secret life collapsed, it would take every lie he had built with it. The night I saw Daniel slip that diamond ring onto Lena's finger, something inside me finally settled into place. For weeks my emotions had moved wildly between shock, anger, sadness, and disbelief. But watching that moment across the street, the quiet proposal under a dim yellow streetlight, transformed everything into something colder and sharper. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was clarity. Daniel had already decided the future he wanted. He simply hadn't told me yet. As I sat in my parked car, my phone still recording from a distance, I watched Lena throw her arms around in excitement. Daniel laughed and pulled her close, kissing her forehead while cars passed behind them and strangers walked by without noticing anything unusual. To them, it probably looked like a happy couple celebrating an engagement. But to me, it felt like witnessing the final confirmation that my marriage had never been what I believed it was. When they eventually walked into the restaurant together, I ended the recording and stared at the screen for a long moment. The evidence was undeniable now. Months of messages, financial transfers, videos of secret meetings, and now a proposal. I could have driven straight home and confronted him immediately. I could have stormed into that restaurant and exposed everything right then, but instead, I did something different. I smiled because Daniel still believed I knew nothing, and that meant I still had control over how the story ended. Over the next 2 weeks, I continued pretending everything was normal. I cooked dinner. I asked Daniel about his day. I listened to his excuses about late meetings and business trips. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Amanda, my lawyer, helped me finalize the legal groundwork. Every document was prepared carefully. Financial records, property agreements, evidence files. The deeper we looked, the worse Daniel's actions appeared. Not only had he secretly transferred thousands of dollars to Lena over the past year, but several of those transfers came directly from accounts tied to our shared assets. That meant one important thing. Legally, it mattered. By the time everything was organized, Amanda looked at me across her office desk and said quietly, "When you reveal this, Daniel won't have anywhere to hide." That was exactly what I wanted. But I didn't want a quiet legal battle hidden inside a courtroom. Daniel had spent months lying to me while building a second life, so I decided the truth deserved a stage. The opportunity arrived sooner than I expected. One evening, Daniel walked into the kitchen with an unusually cheerful expression. "I have some news," he said while loosening his tie. I raised an eyebrow playfully. "Good news, I hope." He nodded. "My company is hosting a big networking event next Friday," he said. "Investors, partners, clients, the whole industry crowd." "That sounds important," I replied. "It is," Daniel said. "Spouses are invited too. I thought you might want to come." For a moment, I simply stared at him. The irony was almost unbelievable. Daniel was inviting me to a public event while secretly planning a future with another woman. But instead of reacting, I smiled. "I'd love to," I said. Friday night arrived faster than expected. The event took place at a luxury hotel downtown, inside a grand ballroom filled with soft golden lighting and the quiet murmur of hundreds of conversations. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, while waiters moved between guests carrying trays of champagne. Daniel looked confident and relaxed as we entered together. He placed a gentle hand on my back while introducing me to colleagues and business partners. "Everyone, this is my wife," he said proudly. Each time he said those words, I felt a strange sense of calm, because I knew something he didn't. About an hour into the event, I noticed Lena across the room. She stood near the bar wearing an elegant black dress, laughing with a small group of people, and on her left hand, exactly where I expected it, the diamond ring sparkled under the ballroom lights. She hadn't seen me yet. Daniel hadn't noticed her either, but that was about to change. I excused myself from a conversation and walked calmly toward the small stage where the event's host had been making announcements throughout the evening. The microphone rested on a stand. No one stopped me when I picked it up. At first, only a few nearby guests turned their heads. "Good evening, everyone," I said clearly. My voice echoed through the room as the microphone connected to the speakers. Within seconds, the conversations around the ballroom began to quiet. Daniel looked up from across the room, confusion spreading across his face. "Most of you don't know me," I continued calmly, "but many of you know my husband, Daniel Harper." Now, dozens of heads turned in his direction. Daniel's expression shifted from confusion to alarm as he realized what was happening. "I just want to take a moment tonight," I said, "to congratulate Daniel on his engagement." A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. Daniel's face went pale. Across the room, Lena froze. "After all," I continued, "a man proposing to another woman while still married deserves recognition for his level of commitment." The silence in the ballroom became absolute. Then I pulled out my phone. The large screen behind the stage suddenly lit up as the video I had prepared began playing. The footage from the cafe appeared first. Daniel kissing Lena across the table. Gasps spread through the audience. Then came screenshots of their messages, photos from secret meetings, financial transfers, and finally, the video of Daniel proposing under the streetlight. No one in the room spoke. Daniel stood frozen in the middle of the crowd, his entire world collapsing in front of hundreds of witnesses. Lena looked like she might faint. I placed the microphone back on the stand. "That's all," I said quietly. Then I stepped off the stage. Daniel tried to reach me as I walked toward the exit. "Wait, listen to me, this isn't," he stammered. But I kept walking. For the first time in weeks, I felt completely calm. Behind me, the room erupted into shocked whispers and stunned conversations. Daniel's carefully constructed double life had just been exposed in the worst possible way. And this time, he couldn't hide from the truth. 3 months later, the divorce was finalized. Daniel lost more than half his assets after the financial investigation revealed how he had misused shared funds during the affair. His reputation in the consulting industry also suffered heavily after the scandal spread through professional circles. As for Lena, the engagement didn't last long. It turns out relationships built on betrayal rarely survive once the secrets disappear. One quiet Sunday morning, I sat alone in the backyard of the house that had once felt like the center of my entire world. The autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves, and the maple trees glowed deep red under the soft sunlight. For the first time in a long while, the future didn't feel uncertain. It felt open. Daniel had believed I would never find out about his affair. He believed I would remain the trusting wife who never questioned anything. But in the end, he learned something important. The most dangerous mistake you can make is underestimating the person who trusted you the most.